You are a curse to this family. My older sister, Rowena, hissed those exact words across the massive mahogany dining table. The expensive red wine in her oversized crystal glass sloshed violently, staining the delicate rim like a ring of fresh blood. The dining room, usually echoing with the hollow clinking of polished silverware and my mother Calliope's forced, high-pitched laughter, went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick Persian rug. Actually, you could hear the subtle, rhythmic hum of the smart refrigerator in the kitchen. That is how profoundly quiet it got. I just sat there, my silver fork hovering halfway to my mouth, staring blankly at the woman who shared my DNA but acted as if I were a contagious disease she had scraped off her expensive designer shoes. Let me take a moment to paint the picture for you, so you can truly understand the suffocating atmosphere of my existence. It was our usual Sunday family dinner. The kind of weekly dinner where everyone puts on their best clothes and pretends we are a flawless, catalog-perfect American family ripped straight from a television commercial. My mom, Calliope, had spent the better part of 3 hours preparing a roast that was somehow simultaneously burnt to a crisp on the outside and alarmingly bleeding on the inside. My dad, Thatcher, sat at the head of the long table in his perfectly tailored gray slacks and crisp white button-down, sipping a very expensive scotch and acting like the king of a very small, very fragile castle. And then there was Rowena, the undeniable golden child, sitting adjacent to her equally pretentious husband, Nash. The terrible crime that sparked this sudden execution? I had just calmly, and with a very even tone, refused to hand over $2,000 to fund their upcoming luxury family vacation to the Bahamas. $2,000 that I had worked 60 exhausting hours a week for in my role as a senior corporate auditor. $2,000 that they felt entirely entitled to, simply because I am single, I do not have children, and I actually possess the basic life skill of knowing how to manage a savings account without going into the red. They had presented the itinerary as a done deal. 7 days in a beachfront villa. Nash had gleefully printed out the glossy brochures and slid them across the table to me, pointing to the bottom line where my supposed share was highlighted in bright yellow marker. When I looked at it, laughed softly, and slid it back, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I just said I am not paying for a luxury trip that I was not even formally invited on until you realized you were short on the deposit, I replied, keeping my voice terrifyingly level, refusing to let the tremor in my chest reach my throat. Because you always ruin everything, Sloane. Rowena snapped, slamming her manicured hand on the table so hard the water goblets rattled. You sit there with your spreadsheets and your endless judgment, acting like you are so much better than all of us. You do not contribute to the warmth or the love in this house. You only bring us down with your negativity. You are a curse to this family. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Curse. I looked past her manicured finger pointing aggressively at my face and looked directly down the table at my dad. I waited. I held my breath. This was the moment a parent steps in, right? The defining moment a father tells his eldest daughter to back off, to stop being so terribly dramatic, to apologize for crossing a massive line. I waited for Thatcher to clear his throat, to use that booming real estate broker voice to restore order and demand respect. He did not. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his amber scotch. He looked at me, his eyes cold, empty, and exhausted. He set the heavy glass down on his coaster with a soft thud. She has a point, Sloane, he said, his voice void of any warmth, any paternal affection. You make every single gathering a battleground. You are always questioning our financial choices. Always making things difficult. Always analyzing us like we are one of your clients. Just get out and do not come back. We need a break from you. My own father. He did not just fail to defend me. He walked right over, handed her the weapon, and helped her pull the trigger. My mother, Calliope, suddenly found her plate of overcooked green beans incredibly fascinating. She did not look up. She did not utter a single syllable of defense. Nash, my parasite of a brother-in-law, simply leaned back in his plush dining chair and smirked, tapping his smartphone screen like he was already texting his buddies about the pathetic family drama unfolding 2 feet away from him. I looked at the 4 of them, studying their faces one by one. The entitled golden child, the enabling and cowardly father, the willfully silent mother, the arrogant brother-in-law. For 29 long, exhausting years, I had bent over backwards trying to prove my worth to these people. I had paid their random bills, I had covered their foolish mistakes, I had bitten my tongue until it practically bled just to keep the fragile peace. And this was my ultimate reward. Being called a curse. Being told to get out and never return. Okay, I said. That single word fell flat, heavy as lead on the dining table. Rowena blinked, her face scrunching up in genuine confusion. She was expecting a massive fight. She was expecting me to cry, to defend myself, to beg for their understanding and forgiveness so she could twist the knife a little deeper into my ribs. Okay, Thatcher echoed, his gray eyebrows pulling together in a frown. Yes. Okay, I will get out. I will not come back. I stood up slowly. I did not throw my linen napkin in a fit of rage. I did not scream or curse at them. I pushed my chair in with deliberate, chilling precision. I walked out of the dining room and down the long hallway, taking my wool coat off the brass rack and grabbing my car keys from the console table. Sloane, do not be dramatic, my mother finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly as she stood in the kitchen archway, wringing her hands. The deep irony of her statement was suffocating. I was being kicked out of my childhood home, but somehow, in her twisted reality, I was the one causing a scene. I am not being dramatic, Mom, I said, slipping my arms into my coat, adjusting the collar. I am being obedient. I am following instructions. You all want me gone. So I am gone. Nash chuckled loudly from the dining room, the sound scraping against my ears. See you at Christmas, Sloane. Try to bring some holiday cheer next time instead of an attitude. I did not even bother to look at him. I reached out, opened the heavy oak front door, and stepped out into the crisp, biting evening air. I pulled the door shut behind me, making sure it clicked firmly and decisively into the lock. I walked down the driveway to my car, my heels clicking rhythmically against the cold concrete. I did not look back at the brightly lit bay windows. I did not shed a single tear. I felt a strange, freezing clarity settling heavily over my chest. I started the engine, backed out of the driveway, and left behind 29 years of playing the good, compliant daughter. But there was one massive, glaring detail they did not realize as they sat in their warm dining room, congratulating themselves on getting rid of the family buzzkill. They had just kicked out the only person keeping a roof over their ungrateful heads. And the storm that was coming for them would be entirely relentless. The long drive away from my parents' upscale suburban neighborhood was a blurring canvas of yellow streetlights and dark, towering trees. The heater in my small sedan was blasting at full capacity, blowing hot air directly onto my hands, but I felt ice cold from the inside out. My mind, usually hyper-organized and structured like the pristine financial ledgers I audit for a living, was a chaotic, spinning slideshow of every painful memory, every slight, every blatant act of favoritism I had endured under that roof. It felt exactly like driving through a dark, lonely museum dedicated to my own personal injustices. My brain mercilessly flipped to Exhibit A. I was 18 years old. I had just gotten accepted into a top-tier state university for their rigorous accounting program. I remembered running downstairs with a thick acceptance letter in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs with pure excitement and pride. I showed it to my dad. He barely looked up from his newspaper, patted my shoulder awkwardly, and said, "That is great, kiddo. Better start applying for those student loans early. Interest rates are a killer right now." I ended up taking on $40,000 in suffocating student debt, working 3 exhausting part-time jobs, flipping burgers at a greasy diner, shelving books in the library, and running errands as an intern, and eating nothing but instant ramen and bulk rice for 4 grueling years just to survive and get my degree. A mere 6 months later, Rowena graduated high school by the skin of her teeth with terrible, embarrassing grades. She declared loudly that she did not want to go to college. She wanted to take a gap year to find her true artistic self. My parents' response to this lack of ambition? Thatcher marched down to the local luxury dealership and bought her a brand new, $35,000 European sedan as a graduation present. It even had a giant red bow on the roof. She needs reliable, safe transportation to explore her opportunities and network, my mother had justified smoothly, entirely refusing to meet my eyes when I pointed out I was taking a dangerous, poorly lit late-night bus back to my cramped dorm room after my midnight diner shifts. Exhibit B flashed before my eyes. I was 26. I had just landed my highly coveted senior auditor position at a major corporate firm. I took the whole family out to a ridiculously expensive downtown steakhouse to celebrate my promotion. The entire night, all Rowena talked about was how her newly opened independent fashion boutique was struggling because the local economy was so unfair to small business owners. Nash chimed in repeatedly, making snide, passive-aggressive comments implying my corporate job was soul-sucking, uncreative, and lacked real passion. My parents nodded along in deep, genuine sympathy for Rowena's profound artistic struggle, utterly ignoring the fact that I was the one silently paying the $300 dinner tab with my newly issued corporate card. But the biggest exhibit, the crowning masterpiece of their lifelong manipulation, happened when I was 24 years old. Thatcher's independent commercial real estate business had hit a massive, devastating slump. He had made some terrible, high-risk investments, the market shifted, and his cash flow dried up almost overnight. He called me over and sat me down in his dark, wood-paneled home office, looking defeated, small, and uncharacteristically desperate. He told me he needed to refinance the family home to pull out equity to save his dying business and keep them afloat. But his credit was wrecked. The banks had literally laughed him out of their lobbies. He begged me, actually begged me, with tears welling in his eyes, to co-sign the new massive mortgage. It is just a formality, Sloan. Just a piece of paper, he had promised, his voice thick with emotion, his hands shaking as he held the pen out to me. You have excellent credit. You are so responsible. You will not have to pay a single dime out of your own pocket. I swear to you on my life. I will handle it all. It is just to get the initial approval so we do not end up on the street. You have to help me, sweetheart. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. I hesitated. I sat in that leather chair for a full 10 minutes, staring at the document. As an auditor, I understood exactly what putting my name on a deed and a massive loan meant. I knew the catastrophic risks. But I was 24. He was my dad. I desperately wanted to be the hero, the good, reliable daughter who finally earned their respect and love. So, against every single professional instinct I had, I signed the paperwork. I linked my good name and my pristine credit to a massive mountain of their debt. I handed them a financial lifeline. For 5 long years, nothing happened. The business stabilized somewhat, the monthly payments were apparently being made on time, and the house remained theirs. They never thanked me. In fact, they acted like that agonizing meeting in the office never even happened. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as the highway lines blurred together into a continuous yellow streak. The memory tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. I had risked my own financial future, my own stability, for them. And tonight, they looked me in the eye, called me a curse, and threw me out into the cold over a pathetic $2,000 vacation contribution. I finally reached my apartment complex. It was a modest, 3rd-floor walk-up, but it was mine. I walked inside, the silence of my own safe space hitting me like a physical wave. I did not bother to sit down on the couch or turn on the television. I walked straight to my bedroom, pulled a large canvas duffel bag from the closet, and started aggressively throwing clothes into it. Jeans, heavy sweaters, running shoes, my work laptop, my tangled chargers, a small bag of toiletries. My phone buzzed loudly on the wooden nightstand. The screen lit up. Rowena. Stop being a child. Mom is upset. Come back right now and apologize for ruining Sunday dinner. I stared at the glowing screen. She wanted me to drive all the way back and apologize for being verbally abused and kicked out. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was almost impressive in its delusion. I did not type a reply. I did not even feel the urge to fight back. I calmly went into my phone settings, tapped on her contact name, and hit the block button. Then I scrolled to Thatcher. Blocked. Then Calliope. Blocked. Then Nash. Blocked. I zipped up my heavy duffel bag and slung it over my shoulder. I knew exactly where I was going. My best friend from college, Maya, owned a small, rustic wooden cabin up in the mountains, about a 3-hour drive north of the city limit. She rarely used it in the bitter winter months and had given me the permanent code to the porch key lockbox years ago. Go there whenever the city gets too loud or your family gets too toxic, she always told me. Tonight, the city was not loud. But my family had finally crossed the point of no return. I carried my heavy bag out to the parking lot, tossed it into the trunk, and got back onto the desolate highway. I drove deep into the night, leaving the glowing city lights far behind in the rearview mirror. The wide roads slowly turned to two-lane highways, then to steep, winding mountain passes bordered by thick, dark pine trees that looked like towering shadows. I felt a strange, intoxicating sense of liberation mixing with a deep, aching hollow in my chest. They had ordered me to disappear. They wanted me gone. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was pulling the only load-bearing foundation brick out of their crumbling illusion of a perfect life. I just wondered how long it would take for their expensive roof to violently cave in on them. I arrived at the mountain cabin well past midnight. The air up here at this elevation was incredibly thin and sharp, smelling strongly of frozen pine needles and the faint, lingering scent of wood smoke from a distant neighbor's chimney. I punched the code into the rusty lockbox, retrieved the heavy brass key, unlocked the thick wooden door, flipped the main light switch, and breathed out a long, shaky, visible sigh. The cabin was wonderfully small and rustic, consisting of a cozy main living area with a massive stone fireplace, a tiny but functional kitchenette, and a steep wooden ladder leading up to a loft bedroom. It was perfect. It was empty. It was undeniably safe. The first day was remarkably strange. I woke up on the slightly lumpy mattress with the bright morning sun streaming through the uncurtained loft windows, and my immediate, ingrained instinct was to blindly reach for my phone. I unlocked the screen, habitually swiping toward my messages, tensing my shoulders as I expected the usual daily barrage of family group chat demands. Sloan, pick up milk on your way home. Sloan, transfer that money for the cable bill. Sloan, why aren't you answering me? But there was nothing. No red badges. No notifications. Because I had blocked every single one of them. I climbed down the ladder, made a strong pot of black coffee in the ancient percolator, wrapped myself in a thick, scratchy woolen blanket, and sat out on the wooden front porch. The surrounding forest was incredibly, beautifully quiet. Just the soothing sound of the cold wind rustling heavily through the high branches and the occasional, sharp chirp of a hidden bird. For the first time in 29 years, nobody needed me. Nobody was silently judging the clothes I was wearing or the way I drank my coffee. Nobody was asking me to shrink myself down so they could feel bigger and more important. Days 2, 3, and 4 passed in a peaceful, healing haze of simple, grounding routines. I found an axe in the shed and spent hours chopping heavy firewood until my arms ached in a good way. I went for long, exhausting hikes up the steep mountain trails until my legs burned and my lungs gasped for the thin air, forcing my mind to focus only on survival and movement rather than family trauma. I read thick, dog-eared paperback thrillers I found on Maya's dusty living room bookshelf, immersing myself in other people's fictional problems. I cooked incredibly simple meals, eating pasta right out of the metal pan while sitting cross-legged on the rug. I slept for 10 straight hours a night without ever setting an alarm clock, letting my exhausted body dictate its own rhythm. By day 5, a profound, life-altering realization washed over me. It hit me suddenly while I was sitting quietly on the porch railing, watching a vibrant blue jay hop along the frosty wood. I did not miss them. I honestly, truly did not miss my mother's passive-aggressive, whispered comments about my weight fluctuations or her constant disappointment in my career choice. I did not miss my father's heavy, burdened sighs whenever I spoke at the dinner table, as if my mere existence was an exhausting tax on his limited patience. I undeniably did not miss Rowena's endless, self-centered monologues about her own fabricated brilliance and how the entire world was conspiring against her success. I had spent my entire adult life terrified of being abandoned by them, constantly trying to buy their conditional love with good grades, a high-paying corporate job, and massive financial bailouts. But sitting here in the quiet, frozen woods, listening to nothing but the wind, I realized I was not actually mourning the loss of my family. I was mourning the idea of a family I never actually had. I was mourning a television fantasy. The harsh reality was that they were a group of selfish leeches, and I had finally, permanently severed the vein they were feeding on. Banda bao geo kamthane nam kai bai vut bochua? Hey dalai ben lon ne, va dung quain dang ky kan truok kai chung ta den voi ku soc teep theo. Day 8, Day 9, Day 10. The deep silence of the cabin became my protective armor. With every passing hour of no contact, I felt stronger, clearer, sharper. My mind stopped spinning in anxious, desperate circles about how to please them or how to fix their self-inflicted crises. Instead, I started thinking purely about myself. My future. What I wanted my life to look like. I realized that keeping their phone numbers blocked was not just a dramatic, temporary reaction to a bad dinner. It was a necessary, permanent boundary for my own mental survival. I was never going back to those toxic Sunday dinners. I was never paying for another shared meal. I was done. On the morning of Day 11, the total isolation started to feel just a bit too heavy, and practicality began to set in. I had some personal utility bills of my own to pay, and as a senior auditor, I desperately needed to check my secure work emails to ensure nothing catastrophic had happened at the firm while I took my abrupt, unexplained personal leave. I sat on the faded floral sofa in the living room, holding my cold phone in my hand, staring at the black screen. I took a deep, steadying breath, went into my settings menu, and unblocked the 4 numbers. I just wanted to deal with some joint utility accounts I needed to formally remove my name from before I disappeared from their lives for good. I honestly expected maybe 1 or 2 angry, lingering texts from Rowena demanding a belated apology. I turned the Wi-Fi and cellular data back on. For 3 agonizing seconds, absolutely nothing happened. The screen remained peacefully clear. Then, the phone vibrated in my palm. A short, sharp buzz. Then it vibrated again. Then a loud chime rang out. Then another. And another. The bright screen lit up, flashing wildly as a massive backlog of notifications poured in like a concrete dam had suddenly burst. It buzzed so hard and fast in my hand it felt like a living, panicking creature trying to escape my grip. Ping, 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 ping. My eyes widened in genuine shock as I watched the little red numbers tick rapidly up on my screen. 5, 10, 20, 40. I sat completely paralyzed on the sofa until the phone finally stopped its violent shaking, exhausted by the data dump. I looked down at the lock screen. To say I was shocked would be a massive understatement. I thought they would be thoroughly enjoying their peaceful, Sloan-free week. But my cluttered screen told a very, very different story. And the beautiful, healing silence was officially, violently over. 14 long voicemails. 45 frantic text messages. 22 missed incoming calls. I sat frozen on the floral sofa, staring blankly at the bright lock screen, the red notification badges glowing intensely like warning sirens in the dark cabin. I slowly dragged my thumb across the glass, unlocked the phone, and opened my messaging application. I scrolled all the way to the very top of the massive thread, rewinding back to the day after the disastrous Sunday dinner, wanting to see exactly how this escalation of panic began. The timeline of their descending madness was a fascinating psychological study in entitlement and desperation. Day 2, Rowena. You're acting like a spoiled brat, Sloan. Turn your phone on and come apologize to Mom. She is crying because of you. Day 4, Thatcher. Sloan. This silent treatment is immature and unnecessary. Call me immediately. We need to talk about some urgent paperwork. Paperwork? I raised an eyebrow, a cold knot forming in my stomach. What paperwork could possibly be urgent? Day 7, Calliope. Honey, please call us. Please. Your father is very stressed out. Something terrible has come up. Please answer your phone. The tone shifted drastically by day 8. The arrogant, commanding demands vanished entirely, replaced by frantic, poorly spelled desperation that reeked of genuine fear. Day 8, Nash. Hey Sloan, you need to call your dad ASAP. Things are really bad here. Not joking around. Day 9, Rowena. Sloan, where are you? Pick up the damn phone. We need you here now. Day 10, Calliope. Sloan, please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. We are going to lose everything. You have to come home today. Please save us. Lose everything? My heart gave a heavy, uncomfortable thud against my ribs. I switched over from the text messages to the voicemail inbox. I tapped the play button on the most recent audio message, left just 2 hours ago. The caller ID showed it was from Uncle Gideon, my dad's older brother. Uncle Gideon was the strict principal of a large local high school, a stern, no-nonsense man who rarely, if ever, got involved in my immediate family's theatrical, exhausting dramas. If Gideon was calling me, the house was actively on fire. Literally or metaphorically. I held the cold phone up to my ear, listening to the static. Sloan, it is Uncle Gideon, his deep, gravelly voice echoed through the tiny speaker. He sounded incredibly exhausted, older than his 55 years. Listen to me, I do not know where you went or what the hell happened at that dinner last week, but you need to call me immediately. Your father has messed up. Badly. The bank sent a final foreclosure notice via certified mail yesterday. They are moving to legally seize the house next Tuesday morning. The bank manager says he is 3 full months behind on the mortgage payments. Because your name is listed on the deed and as the primary cosigner on the loan, they require your physical signature and presence to even discuss a restructuring plan or a grace period. Your parents are a complete wreck. They are packing boxes. Call me the second you get this. I slowly lowered the phone, placing it face down on the wooden coffee table. The air in the cabin suddenly felt incredibly thin, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out through the chimney. Bank foreclosing. 3 months behind. Next Tuesday. My mind instantly snapped out of its peaceful vacation mode and shifted directly into high-gear auditor mode. The cold, hard numbers began to scroll rapidly behind my eyes like lines of code. Their monthly mortgage payment on that massive house was roughly $3,000. 3 months behind meant $9,000 in direct arrears. Add in the exorbitant late fees, the compound penalty interest, and the aggressive legal fees the bank charges when they initiate foreclosure. Call it $12,000 to $15,000 just to stop the immediate bleeding and halt the auction. But why? Why were they in this position? Thatcher's commercial real estate business was slow, yes, but not default on your primary residence and ignore the bank slow. My parents still went out to fancy dinners every Friday. Calliope had just proudly paraded a $1,200 designer handbag around last month. Rowena was aggressively demanding a $2,000 contribution for a luxury tropical trip. You do not plan a vacation to the Bahamas when the bank is actively threatening to take your roof. You do not buy designer bags when you are dodging collection calls. Unless, of course, you are terrifyingly delusional or you are hiding something massive from the people around you. My phone vibrated violently against the wood table again. Uncle Gideon was calling. I picked it up and answered on the first ring. "Where the hell are you?" He barked into the receiver, though there was an undeniable wave of relief in his harsh tone. "I am at Maya's cabin." "About 3 hours away," I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of any panic. "Uncle Gideon, tell me exactly what is going on. Dad missed 3 payments? How does a supposedly successful commercial broker miss 3 consecutive payments and not tell anyone in the family? He has been hiding the notices in his office drawer." Gideon sighed heavily, the sound of a man carrying too much weight. He thought he could close a big commercial plaza deal this month and catch up on the arrears before anyone, especially the bank, noticed. The deal fell through last Friday. The bank ran out of patience. They served the final notice of intent to foreclose yesterday afternoon. A man in a suit literally knocked on the door and handed it to Calliope. Why did he not just ask me for the money instead of kicking me out over a vacation argument? Pride, probably. And massive stupidity, Gideon grunted in disgust. "Sloan, they need you to come back today. They need your signature on a mountain of documents to negotiate with the bank's loss mitigation department. If you do not show up, the house goes to public auction next week. Your credit is permanently tied to this mess. If they go down, you go down with them. A foreclosure will ruin you. My credit. My perfect, hard-earned, 800-plus credit score that I had built through years of meticulous, exhausting financial discipline. The credit score I desperately needed to eventually buy my own home, to secure my own independent future away from them. They were going to drag me down into their sinking ship because they were too proud to admit they were drowning. I laughed. It started as a low, dark chuckle deep in my chest and quickly erupted into a sharp, bitter, echoing laugh that bounced off the wooden walls of the small cabin. "Sloan? Are you all right?" Gideon asked cautiously, clearly unsettled by my reaction. "I am fine, Uncle Gideon. Actually, I have never been better in my entire life." I walked over to the cabin window, looking out at the dark, imposing tree line. A week ago, my sister looked me dead in the eye and called me a curse to the family. My dad told me to get out and never come back. My mom sat there and let it happen. They threw me away like garbage because I would not buy them a vacation. I know, kid. I heard about the dinner. It was incredibly wrong of them. And now they are begging the curse to come back and save their precious kingdom. I smiled, and looking at my reflection in the glass, it was a cold, predatory thing. Tell them I am coming back. I will be there in 3 hours. Have all the financial documents laid out on the table. I hung up the phone. I did not rush. I carefully folded my clothes, packed my duffel bag, cleaned the cabin meticulously, and locked the door behind me. I got into my car and pointed the headlights south, heading back toward the city. I was driving back into the fire. But they did not know that the person returning was not the compliant, desperate for love daughter they kicked out. They needed a savior. I was bringing an auditor. I pulled into the wide, sweeping driveway of my parents' massive 2-story colonial house just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, dramatic, shadowy fingers across the perfectly manicured lawn. The lawn they paid a professional landscaping company $200 a month to maintain, even while they were secretly defaulting on their mortgage. The pure, unadulterated absurdity of it made my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. Thatcher's massive luxury SUV, Calliope's sleek silver sedan, and Nash's flashy red sports car were all parked haphazardly outside, boxing each other in. The whole gang was here, waiting in terror for me, waiting for the person they despised to walk through the door and pull a financial miracle out of her pocket to save their fragile egos. I grabbed my heavy duffel bag from the trunk, walked slowly up the winding brick path, and pushed the heavy oak front door open without bothering to knock. The scene inside was pure, unadulterated chaos. The grand, high-ceilinged foyer and the adjoining formal living room looked like a paper hurricane had ripped through them. Stacks of bank envelopes, legal notices stamped with bright red urgent, warnings, printed email threads, and messy financial statements were scattered across the glass coffee table, the dining table, and the massive granite kitchen island. My mother, Calliope, was sitting on the expensive white leather sofa, clutching a crumpled tissue to her face, rocking slightly back and forth. When she heard the heavy front door click shut, her head snapped up. Her elaborate makeup was heavily smeared down her cheeks, her eyes bloodshot, red, and puffy from hours of crying. "Sloan," she gasped, dropping the wet tissue and scrambling clumsily to her feet. She rushed across the hardwood floor toward me, her arms outstretched for a desperate, clinging hug. I stepped smoothly and coldly to the side, letting her arms fall to empty air. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it cut through the tense room like a sharp whip. Calliope froze in her tracks, her face crumpling with fresh, loud tears as she backed away. Thatcher stepped out of the kitchen archway. He looked like he had aged 10 grueling years in the 11 days since I last saw him. His usually immaculate, styled hair was a messy nest, his expensive dress shirt wrinkled and untucked. He looked at me, swallowing hard, visibly trying to summon the patriarchal authority he no longer possessed. "Sloan, you came back." He cleared his throat, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. I am deeply sorry about how things went down last week at dinner. We were all just under a lot of stress. Financial stress. You know how it is when things get tight. I do not want your fake, pathetic apologies, Dad, I said, dropping my heavy bag by the door with a loud thud. I walked right past him, straight into the brightly lit kitchen, and stood over the granite island covered in scattered papers. I want the truth. Uncle Gideon told me you are 3 months behind on the mortgage. Let us see the actual damage. Rowena was leaning heavily against the kitchen counter near the sink, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was trying desperately to maintain her usual arrogant, untouchable posture, but her eyes kept darting nervously toward the stack of red foreclosure notices. Nash stood slightly behind her, looking uncharacteristically silent, pale, and small. You do not need to walk in here acting like you own the place, Sloane, Rowena muttered, though her voice lacked its usual venomous bite. It sounded weak and shaky. We just need you to sign the bank's restructure forms and help us float the late fees for a few weeks. We are family. Family helps each other in times of crisis. I slowly turned my head, fixing my gaze on her pale face. You looked me in the eye and called me a curse, Rowena. You told me I contribute absolutely nothing to this family. You all drove me out of this house into the freezing night. Do not you dare use the word family to try and manipulate me now. She flinched violently and looked down at the tile floor, her bravado shattering. I pulled out a tall wooden bar stool, sat down, and started systematically sorting through the chaotic mess of papers. Late notices. Penalty fee schedules. Highly threatening letters from the bank's aggressive legal department detailing the auction process. I dug through the pile until I found the master payoff statement detailing the exact, down to the penny amount required to halt the foreclosure proceedings. $15,420. I read the bolded number aloud, letting it echo in the quiet kitchen. I looked up at Thatcher, locking eyes with him. That is what it takes to bring the account current and pay off the bank's legal fees. Today. Do you have it? Thatcher looked away, staring at the refrigerator. No. The business checking accounts are completely drained. I was hoping you could loan us the money from your savings, Sloane. Just until I close my next commercial deal. I promise I will pay you back with interest. Plus, we urgently need you to come to the bank branch with me tomorrow morning to sign off on the restructure documents. The manager will not speak to me without the cosigner present. I ignored his desperate request for my savings. My eyes were already scanning the printed bank statements, my finger tracking the deposits and massive withdrawals over the last 12 months. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with the math. My brain, hardwired for pattern recognition and financial anomalies, immediately caught a glaring, massive inconsistency that made no logical sense. Dad, I said, tracing my fingernail down a long column of printed numbers. Your mortgage is $3,000 a month. Business has been slow, yes, I see the lack of commission deposits. But your personal checking account statement here shows you had over $60,000 in liquid cash just 6 short months ago. Where did it go? How do you miss 3 mortgage payments when you had 60 grand? Thatcher's face went completely, terrifyingly white. The color drained from his cheeks so fast I genuinely thought he might pass out right there in the kitchen. Calliope let out a small, strangled gasp from the doorway and quickly covered her mouth with both hands. Business expenses, Sloane. Living expenses. Things add up fast, Thatcher stammered, taking a clumsy step backward, bumping into the counter. Living expenses? I picked up another sheet of paper, holding it up. You did not pay the mortgage for March, April, or May. But right here, in late February, there is a massive, authorized withdrawal from the home equity line of credit. You tapped into the house's equity right before you stopped paying the mortgage. I squinted at the paper, doing the quick math in my head. You pulled out exactly $45,000 in a single cashier's check. The kitchen was so incredibly silent you could hear the frantic ticking of the wall clock and the ragged breathing of my mother. I stood up, the bank statement trembling slightly in my clenched hand. I walked slowly around the kitchen island, deliberately closing the distance between me and my terrified father until I was standing inches away from him. Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy tone that I had never used before. $15,000 is just the late fees. You intentionally drained $45,000 of hard equity out of a house that has my legal name and my credit attached to it. What did you do with that massive amount of money? What are you hiding from me? Thatcher opened his mouth, his jaw working, but no sound came out. He looked helplessly, desperately, past my shoulder toward Rowena. And in that one split-second, guilty glance, I understood everything. The massive puzzle pieces violently slammed together in my mind, creating a picture of betrayal so deep it took my breath away. I dropped the bank statement onto the granite counter. I slowly, deliberately turned my gaze away from my terrified, sweating father and locked eyes with my golden child sister. Rowena was suddenly finding the dirty grout lines on the kitchen floor utterly mesmerizing, refusing to look up. You gave it to her, I stated. It was not a question. It was a cold, hard fact. Thatcher rubbed his face with violently trembling hands. Her business was failing Sloane. The boutique, she had taken out terrible, high-interest loans from some aggressive lenders to buy inventory. She was going to go completely bankrupt and lose everything. I had to help her. I am her father. She is your sister. So you secretly mortgaged the family house. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my dry throat, dark, acidic, and entirely humorless. You risked the very roof over your head, and you risked my pristine credit score to pump $45,000 into a vanity boutique that sells overpriced, ugly clothes to nobody? You set our house on fire just to keep her warm. It was an investment in my future. Rowena suddenly shrieked, her head snapping up, her eyes blazing with defensive, irrational fury. The retail market was just temporarily bad. You do not understand how real business works, Sloane. You just sit in a gray cubicle looking at boring spreadsheets all day. I am a creative entrepreneur. Dad believed in my vision. You are a financial parasite, I fired back, taking a step toward her, my voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. I look at corporate spreadsheets for a living, Rowena. I know exactly what your business model is. It is a massive black hole. I have seen the papers. You have claimed a net loss on your taxes for 3 years straight. You used Dad's home equity money to pay off your personal credit cards so you could keep playing pretend on Instagram, taking photos with designer bags and drinking champagne while he defaulted on the mortgage to pay for it. Do not speak to your sister that way. Calliope cried out, rushing forward to put a protective, trembling arm around Rowena's shoulders. Always the blind protector of the golden child. Even as the ship was actively sinking beneath the waves, Calliope was busy adjusting Rowena's expensive life jacket. Oh, I will speak to her however I want, Mom, I said, my pent-up anger finally breaking through my icy calm, burning hot and fierce. Because I am the only one standing here holding the shovel, trying to figure out how to dig you all out of this massive grave you dug for yourselves. But wait, we are not done. There is more, is not there? I turned my sharp attention to Nash. He had been quietly inching toward the hallway, trying desperately to blend into the floral wallpaper and escape the crossfire. And you, Nash, I said. He froze mid-step, his eyes widening. You have been awfully quiet tonight. You were very, very eager to tell me to see myself out last Sunday. Very eager to rush Dad into selling this house quickly. I was just looking out for the best interests of the family, Nash said smoothly, putting his hands in his pockets, trying to fake a confident smile. Selling the house is the logical choice here. Downsize. Clear all the debts. Start fresh. Clear whose debts exactly, Nash? I took a menacing step toward him. Before I drove back here tonight, I did a little bit of digging on my laptop. It is truly amazing what public court records and a basic background check can reveal when you know exactly where to look. Did you happen to tell Thatcher and Calliope about the massive civil lawsuit filed against you last month by American Express? Rowena whipped her head around to look at her husband, her mouth falling open. What lawsuit? What are you talking about? Nash's confident, arrogant smirk melted completely off his face, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. Sloane, shut up. That is private business. Do not do this. You are currently being sued for $60,000 in unpaid credit card debt and high-interest personal loans. Nash, I said loudly, making sure every single syllable hit the walls of the kitchen. $60,000. mostly from online sports betting sites and weekend casino trips, according to the itemized filings. You wanted Dad to sell this house fast so you and Rowena could guilt him into giving you a massive chunk of the cash to save your own skin from bankruptcy. Nash, tell me this is a lie. Is this true? Thatcher demanded, his voice cracking, looking at his son-in-law with pure horror. Nash backed away, holding his hands up defensively. It is under control, Thatcher. I have a plan to pay it all back by stealing money from my parents. Rowena screamed, suddenly turning on her husband like a rabid dog, pushing him hard in the chest with both hands. You told me you were doing incredibly well at the tech company. You said you got a bonus. You spent 45 grand of their money on ugly inventory you never even sold, you hypocrite. Nash yelled back, batting her hands away. I stood in the center of the kitchen, crossing my arms, watching the toxic ecosystem I had grown up in devour itself alive. The flawless golden child was a massive fraud. The highly successful, arrogant brother-in-law was a desperate gambling addict. The patriarch was a weak coward. The grand illusion of the perfect family was lying shattered in millions of jagged pieces on the kitchen floor. It was a glorious, deeply vindicating chaos to witness. But my auditor brain was not done digging. I turned back to the towering pile of papers on the island. There was one thick stack of mail I hadn't looked at yet. It looked like personal loan documents from a smaller local bank. I started flipping through them quickly, ignoring the vicious screaming match happening between Rowena and Nash in the background. I stopped flipping. My blood ran freezing cold. Buried under a stack of unpaid water and electric bills was a formal promissory note. A personal, unsecured loan from a local community credit union. The principal amount listed at the top was $10,000. The date of execution was October of last year. I stared intently at the bottom of the page, where the signatures were required. There, on the line clearly marked co-borrower/guarantor, was my name. Sloan. Written in cursive ink. I picked up the heavy paper, holding it up to the bright kitchen light. It was my name, but it was definitely not my handwriting. The loops on the letters were far too round. The pen pressure was entirely wrong. And most importantly, I never signed this document. I was in Chicago on a massive 2-week work trip in October. The loud screaming in the kitchen slowly faded into dull white noise in my ears. I slowly lowered the paper and looked directly at my mother. Calliope was watching me, her eyes wide with unimaginable terror, her hands shaking so violently she had to grip the edge of the granite counter to stay upright. She knew exactly what piece of paper I was holding. "Mom," I whispered, the terrifying quietness of my voice cutting through the room's chaos and forcing everyone to stop and look at me. "Who signed my legal name on a $10,000 loan document?" Calliope burst into hysterical, ugly sobs, her knees buckling as she sank directly onto the hard kitchen floor, hiding her face in her hands. The storm had not just arrived. It was about to tear the entire house down to its very foundations. Thank you for watching this far. Please leave a comment with "I'm Win." It's a special sign for viewers who have watched this far. I will like and reply to all comments containing the keyword "I'm Win." Don't forget to keep watching to see the final reveal. "Mom," I whispered again, stepping over the scattered bank statements to look down at the woman weeping uncontrollably on the kitchen floor. Who forged my signature on a $10,000 loan document? Calliope could not even form a coherent sentence. She just rocked back and forth, her hands covering her face, emitting a high-pitched, terrifying wail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Thatcher rushed to her side, kneeling on the hard tile, his hands hovering over her shaking shoulders as if he was afraid to actually touch her. "Calliope, what did you do?" Thatcher demanded, his voice thick with a mixture of horror and confusion. "What loan? What is she talking about?" Rowena had gone entirely silent. Nash was practically pressing his back into the hallway wall, looking like he wanted to dissolve into thin air. I just wanted to go to Italy," Calliope finally choked out between ragged sobs, refusing to look up at me. "All my friends were going on those luxury river cruises. Everyone at the country club was talking about their European summers. You were making so much money at the firm, Sloan. You always had so much saved up. I just needed a little bit to keep up appearances. I was going to pay it back. I swear to God I was going to pay it back. I felt a cold, hard knot form in the dead center of my chest. My own mother. You practiced my signature, I said, my voice dead and hollow. You sat down, you took one of my old birthday cards or a school form, and you practiced writing my name until you could fool a loan officer. You committed identity theft and wire fraud so you could drink wine on a boat in Venice. It was for the family image. Calliope wailed, looking up at me with tear-streaked mascara. If people knew we were struggling, your father's business would have tanked even faster. People only do business with successful brokers. I did it for us. You did it for yourself, I corrected her, my tone devoid of any sympathy. Do you have any idea what the penalty for federal wire fraud is? 10 to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. I could walk out that front door right now, drive to the police precinct, hand them this piece of paper, and you would be wearing a jumpsuit by morning. Calliope let out a terrified shriek and grabbed my ankles. No. Please, Sloane, please. I am your mother. I physically stepped back, breaking her grip. Do not pull the mother card. You lost that privilege last Sunday. I looked at Thatcher. He was staring at his wife as if she were a total stranger. The grand illusion of his perfect, upper-class suburban life was bleeding out right there on the kitchen floor. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, we are going to the bank, I told Thatcher, my voice returning to that crisp, professional auditor tone. You will bring every single financial document you possess. And if you lie to me or the bank manager about a single penny, I am taking this forged note straight to the authorities. Am I understood? Thatcher just nodded weakly, a broken man. The next morning, the air inside the bank's executive office was frigid, smelling faintly of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. We sat across from Declan, the senior loss mitigation officer. Declan was a man who looked like he ate spreadsheets for breakfast. He wore a sharp navy suit, wire-rimmed glasses, and an expression of permanent, professional disappointment. He slid a thick folder across his polished mahogany desk. Mr. Thatcher, Declan began, his voice dry and clinical. I have reviewed your files. Your debt-to-income ratio is catastrophic. You have drained $45,000 in equity from this property. You have missed 3 consecutive mortgage payments. Your business accounts show virtually zero incoming revenue for the past 2 quarters. Frankly, I am amazed you managed to keep the lights on this long. Thatcher sat slumped in his leather guest chair, staring at his hands. Calliope sat next to him, wearing large sunglasses to hide her swollen eyes, clutching her designer purse like a life preserver. Before Declan could continue, the heavy glass door to the office swung open. Uncle Gideon walked in. He wore his usual tweed blazer, his jaw set in a firm, unforgiving line. He carried a battered leather briefcase. Thatcher looked up confused. Gideon? What are you doing here? I asked him to come, I said calmly without looking away from Declan. I needed a witness. And I needed full transparency. Uncle Gideon walked over to the desk and pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. He dropped it directly in front of Declan. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. What is this? Declan asked, adjusting his glasses. That, Uncle Gideon said, staring a hole right through my father, is the proof of why my brother cannot be trusted with a single restructuring agreement. 10 years ago, when our parents passed away, Thatcher was the executor of the estate. He told the family the accounts were mostly empty due to medical bills. But they were not. He embezzled $20,000 from the estate trust. Money that was supposed to go into college funds for Sloane and Rowena. The room went entirely still. Calliope gasped, pulling her sunglasses down to stare at her husband. Even I felt a shockwave hit me. $20,000. Stolen from his own parents. Stolen from me. I kept quiet because he begged me, Gideon continued, his voice thick with disgust. He swore he needed it to save his business back then, and he promised he would pay it back to the girls. He never did. And now I see he is pulling the exact same scam on his own daughter. I will not let it happen again. Thatcher tried to speak, but he just stammered, his face turning a dark, blotchy purple. Every ounce of his dignity, His carefully crafted persona of the successful patriarch was stripped away under the harsh fluorescent lights of the bank. He was exposed as a serial liar, a thief, and a failure. Declan slowly opened the manila envelope, scanned the first few pages of the old trust documents, and then closed it. He folded his hands on his desk and looked directly at me. "Well, Miss Sloane," Declan said, his tone shifting from clinical to grimly serious. "This changes the landscape entirely. I am going to be very blunt with you. There is only one way to stop this foreclosure and save the property. But your family is not going to like it one bit." Declan leaned back in his leather chair, the leather creaking loudly in the tense silence of the office. He looked at Thatcher, then at Calliope, and finally settled his sharp gaze entirely on me. "Your father's credit score is effectively a corpse, Miss Sloane," Declan stated, holding up a printout of Thatcher's credit report, covered in red flags. Between the massive equity withdrawal, the consecutive missed mortgage payments, the failing business lines of credit, and now the documented history of financial misappropriation, the bank considers him a critical liability. We will not approve a loan modification or a refinance with his name anywhere near the deed or the mortgage. Thatcher jolted upright in his chair. "What? You cannot just kick me off my own mortgage. I have paid into that house for 20 years. "You borrowed against it for 20 years, Declan corrected him coldly. "You have essentially treated this house like an ATM, and you have hit the daily withdrawal limit permanently. The bank is done doing business with you, sir." Calliope started to hyperventilate quietly, fanning her face with a bank brochure. "Then what happens? Do we lose the house? Where will we go?" Declan turned his attention back to me. "The only viable solution the bank will accept to halt the foreclosure auction scheduled for next Tuesday is a full assumption of the mortgage. Miss Sloane, your credit is impeccable. Your income is stable and verifiable. If you agree to take on the remaining balance of the loan solely in your name, we can restructure the debt." However, Declan raised a finger, his eyes narrowing slightly. "This requires a quitclaim deed. Thatcher and Calliope must sign over 100% of their ownership rights to you. They must be removed from the title entirely. You will become the sole, undisputed legal owner of the property. They will hold no equity, no rights, and no claim to the house. They will effectively become your tenants." The office erupted. "Absolutely not," Thatcher roared, jumping to his feet, his face red with fury. "That is my house. I bought that house. I raised my children in that house. I am not signing over the deed to my own daughter. That is theft." "It is not theft, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through his screaming like a blade through silk. "It is a rescue mission. And you're drowning. I will not do it." Calliope cried out, fresh tears ruining whatever makeup she had left. "It is our family legacy. You cannot just take it from us, Sloane. We will find another way. We will sell Rowena's inventory. We will ask Nash for a loan." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Sell Rowena's inventory? The ugly clothes she has not been able to sell for 3 years? And ask Nash? Did you forget Nash is currently being sued for $60,000 in gambling debts? There is no secret pile of money coming to save you. This is it. This is the end of the road." Uncle Gideon stood behind my chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Listen to your daughter, Thatcher. For once in your miserable life, swallow your pride and face reality. You lost the house the moment you stopped paying for it to fund your golden child's failed vanity project." Thatcher gripped the edge of Declan's desk, breathing heavily, looking like a trapped animal. "There has to be another bank. Another lender." Declan shook his head slowly. "Any lender pulling your file will see the active foreclosure status. The auction is in 4 days. No underwriter in the state will touch you in that time frame. It is this offer or the sheriff's department puts your belongings on the curb on Tuesday." I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles out of my tailored slacks. I looked at my parents, feeling a bizarre sense of detachment. I was looking at 2 strangers who had spent my entire life taking advantage of my desperate need for their approval. But that need was gone now, burned away by the fires of their betrayal. "Here is the deal," I said, looking Thatcher dead in the eye. "You have until tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. We meet at my real estate lawyer's office downtown. You sign the quitclaim deed, handing the house over to me entirely. In exchange, I sign the assumption paperwork, take on your massive debt, and save you from being homeless. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice so only he and Calliope could hear the icy threat. And if you sign, I will take the $10,000 loan document Calliope forged, and I will shred it. You get to stay out of federal prison. But if you refuse, or if you try to fight me, I walk away. The bank takes the house. And I take the forged document directly to the district attorney. Choose. Calliope let out a pathetic whimper, burying her face in her hands. Thatcher stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred, fear, and profound defeat. He finally realized that the daughter he called a curse held the power of life and death over his entire world. Fine, Thatcher spat out, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. We will sign. Good, I said, picking up my purse. See you tomorrow. I walked out of the bank with Uncle Gideon, the bright morning sun feeling surprisingly warm on my face. The hardest part was over. I had forced them into a corner they could not lie their way out of. But as I drove back to the house to gather the rest of my belongings, I knew the war was not entirely won. Rowena was a cornered snake, and cornered snakes always strike when you least expect it. I decided to stay the night at my parents' house. Technically, my house soon. I told them it was because I needed to organize the massive pile of financial documents for the lawyer the next day, but the truth was I did not trust them. I especially did not trust Rowena. I knew my sister. When she felt her unearned power slipping away, she resorted to dirty, vindictive sabotage. The atmosphere in the house that evening was comparable to a funeral parlor. Calliope had locked herself in the master bedroom, refusing to come out. Thatcher sat in his dark home office, staring blankly at the wall, a glass of cheap whiskey in his hand. Rowena and Nash had retreated to the guest room, whispering furiously behind a closed door. I sat at the kitchen island until midnight, going through every single bill, every statement, ensuring there were no other hidden surprises, no other forged loans waiting to detonate my credit. Around 1 a.m, I packed up my laptop and walked quietly down the hallway toward my old childhood bedroom. As I passed the grand living room, my eyes landed on the massive antique curio cabinet standing in the corner. Inside that cabinet sat the only things of true, tangible value left in this house: Grandpa's collection of rare vintage watches and a heavy diamond and sapphire necklace that Calliope's grandmother had brought over from Europe. The collection was easily worth $30,000 on the private market. An alarm bell rang clearly in my auditor's brain. If Thatcher was broke, and Nash was drowning in gambling debt, and Rowena was about to lose her free warehouse space, that jewelry was a glaring target. I went into my bedroom, dug into my duffel bag, and pulled out my old tablet. It had a motion sensor recording app one used to monitor my apartment door when I traveled for work. I walked back out to the dark living room, stealthily wedged the tablet between 2 heavy encyclopedias on the bookshelf, and angled the camera lens directly at the antique curio cabinet. I set it to record straight to my secure cloud drive. I went to bed, leaving my door cracked open just an inch. I did not sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the agonizingly slow ticking of the hallway clock. At exactly 3:15 in the morning, I heard it. The soft, slow creak of the floorboards in the hallway. I held my breath, slipping silently out of bed and creeping toward my door. Through the narrow crack, I saw 2 dark shadows moving stealthily toward the living room. I waited 2 full minutes. Then I heard the distinctive, quiet click of the glass cabinet door opening. The faint clinking of metal and glass. I pushed my door open, walked barefoot down the hallway, and stopped at the archway of the living room. I reached out and flipped the main light switch. The chandelier blazed to life, flooding the room with blinding light. Rowena and Nash practically jumped out of their skin. They spun around, looking like deer caught in the headlights of a speeding truck. Nash was holding a dark canvas duffel bag open. Rowena had her hands full of velvet boxes containing Grandpa's antique watches. Calliope's diamond necklace was already hanging halfway out of the bag. They froze, utterly paralyzed. Going somewhere? I asked, leaning casually against the door frame, my arms crossed. Rowena's face cycled through sheer terror, then desperate calculation, and finally settled on defensive rage. We were just securing these, she stammered, her voice shaking badly. With the foreclosure and the bank coming, we did not want them to get seized. The bank does not seize personal jewelry during a real estate foreclosure, Rowena, I said, walking slowly into the room. You were stealing them. You were going to pack them up, sneak out, pawn them for cash tomorrow morning, and then tell Thatcher and Calliope that I must have taken them out of spite. Nash dropped the canvas bag. It hit the rug with a heavy thud. Sloane, listen. The guys I owe money to, they are not corporate banks. They are bad people. They are threatening me. We just needed a quick bridge loan. You are stealing family heirlooms to pay off your illegal sports bets, I clarified, looking at the velvet boxes clutched in Rowena's trembling hands. Put them back. No. Rowena suddenly shrieked, clutching the boxes to her chest. Dad owes me. He promised to fund my boutique's new line. This money belongs to me. You are already stealing the house, you greedy bitch. Let me have this. I did not yell. I did not move toward her. I simply reached over to the bookshelf, pulled my tablet out from between the encyclopedias, and tapped the screen. I turned it around so they could see the bright red recording symbol flashing in the corner. This tablet is connected to my cloud drive, I said, my voice dangerously calm. It has been recording everything for the last 20 minutes. The audio is crystal clear. I have you on high-definition video stealing tens of thousands of dollars worth of jewelry. That is grand larceny. A massive felony. Nash turned ghostly pale, taking a massive step away from Rowena. I told you this was a terrible idea. I told you she would catch us. Rowena stared at the tablet, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The arrogant, untouchable golden child finally realized she was completely outmatched. She was caught in a trap of her own making. Put them back, I ordered, my voice dropping an octave. Rowena's hands shook violently. She slowly walked over to the cabinet, placed the velvet boxes back on the glass shelves, and carefully draped the diamond necklace next to them. She closed the glass door. Now get out of my sight, I said, pointing toward the hallway. Both of you. Go back to your room and pack your bags. Because things are going to be very different tomorrow. They scurried away like cockroaches under a kitchen light. I locked the curio cabinet, took the key, and went back to bed. I slept like a baby. The next morning, Thatcher, Calliope, Rowena, and Nash were sitting around the kitchen island in dead silence. I walked in, poured myself a cup of coffee, and placed my tablet face up in the center of the granite island. The paused video thumbnail clearly showed Rowena and Nash holding the stolen jewelry in the dead of night. Thatcher stared at the screen, his jaw dropping. Calliope let out a muffled sob. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, looking at the 4 broken people sitting at my table. It is time to go to the lawyer's office, I announced brightly. And we have a lot of new terms to renegotiate. My real estate attorney, Mr. Harrison, was a sharp, meticulous man who had drafted the paperwork exactly to my ruthless specifications. His high-rise downtown office smelled of expensive leather and polished wood, a stark contrast to the desperate, sweaty stench of panic radiating from my family. We sat around a massive glass conference table. The city skyline loomed large behind us, casting a bright, unforgiving light on the proceedings. Thatcher and Calliope sat on one side, looking like prisoners of war awaiting their sentencing. Rowena and Nash sat at the far end, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, utterly terrified that I was going to show the lawyer the video of their midnight heist. Mr. Harrison slid the thick stack of legal documents across the glass. All right, let us proceed, Harrison said briskly, clicking his expensive pen. This first document is the quitclaim deed. By signing this, Mr. and Mrs. Thatcher, you are legally transferring 100% of your ownership, equity, and interest in the property over to Sloane. You will retain 0 legal rights to the house. Thatcher's hand shook violently as he picked up the pen. He stared at the signature line for a long, agonizing minute. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for a last-minute reprieve, a sudden burst of daughterly mercy. He found nothing but cold, unyielding stone. He lowered his head, placed the pen on the paper, and signed his name. Calliope followed, sobbing quietly as she scribbled her signature, officially signing away the grand suburban castle she used to judge everyone else from. "Excellent," Harrison said, pulling the deed away and stamping it. "Now, Sloan assumes the mortgage debt. That paperwork is filed with the bank. Which brings us to the final piece of business." Harrison pulled a fresh, crisp manila folder from his briefcase and slid it toward my parents. "What is this?" Thatcher asked, his voice raw and raspy. "I thought we were done." "That," I said, leaning forward and folding my hands on the glass table, "is your new residential lease agreement." Calliope stopped crying and looked up confused. "Lease? But we're family. You are letting us stay, right?" "I am letting you stay," I confirmed. "But I am not running a charity. I am now carrying a massive mortgage on a house you drained dry. So, starting on the 1st of next month, you will pay me rent." Thatcher flipped open the folder and read the first page. His eyes bulged out of his head. $2,500 a month. "Sloan, are you out of your mind? I cannot afford that. My business is failing." "That is precisely fair market value for a 4-bedroom colonial house in that specific zip code," I replied smoothly, tapping the table. "Actually, I am giving you a slight discount since you will be handling the lawn care yourself. No more $200 a month landscapers. You cannot do this to us." Calliope shrieked, her entitlement suddenly overriding her grief. "We are your parents. You should be taking care of us. You forged my signature on a federal bank loan to go drink wine in Italy," I fired back, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet office. The lawyer did not even flinch. He just continued sorting his papers. "I am taking on a massive debt to keep a roof over your heads, instead of letting the sheriff throw your furniture onto the lawn. This is the deal. $2,500 a month. Due on the 1st. If you are 5 days late, you get a penalty. If you are 15 days late, I file for formal eviction. No exceptions. No excuses. If you do not like it, do not sign it. Go find a cheap apartment." Thatcher looked at me, pure hatred burning in his eyes. But beneath the hatred was the crushing realization that he had absolutely zero leverage. None. He was broke, his credit was dead, and I held the evidence of Calliope's felony forgery. Gritting his teeth so hard I thought they might crack, Thatcher snatched the pen and violently signed the lease agreement. Calliope signed it next, her hand shaking so badly she tore the paper slightly. "Perfect," I said, collecting my copies of the documents. I turned my chair slightly to face the far end of the table, locking eyes with my sister. "Now, Rowena, we need to talk about your boutique." Rowena stiffened, her face going pale. "What about it?" I reached into my designer purse, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it down the long glass table. It stopped directly in front of her. "That is a formal notice to quit," I stated clearly. "You have been using the entire 2-car garage of my house as a free, climate-controlled warehouse for your failed boutique's excess inventory for the past 3 years. You do not pay rent. You do not pay utilities. That ends today." Rowena stared at the eviction notice, her mouth hanging open. "You are kicking my business out?" "Sloan, I have thousands of dollars of inventory in there. I have nowhere else to put it. Storage units are too expensive." "That sounds like an entrepreneur's problem, not an auditor's problem," I said coldly. "You have exactly 48 hours to get every single rack of cheap clothing and every mannequin out of my garage. If there is a single sequin left on the floor by Friday at noon, I am calling a junk removal service to haul it all to the city dump at your expense." "Dad!" Rowena screamed, turning to Thatcher, reverting instantly to the helpless little girl routine. "Do something. Tell her she cannot do this to me." Thatcher looked at his golden child. He looked at the lease he had just signed. He looked at the daughter he had called a curse. For the first time in his entire life, the patriarch had no power to save his favorite. "I cannot do anything, Rowena," Thatcher whispered, his voice broken, staring down at his hands. "It is her house now." Rowena burst into hysterical tears, burying her face in Nash's shoulder. But Nash looked entirely checked out, staring blankly at the wall, probably calculating how fast the men he owed money to were going to catch up with him. The empire of lies had officially fallen. And I was the one holding the crown. The descent in the high-speed elevator of the law firm was the most suffocatingly quiet ride of my entire life. The enclosed steel box trapped the heavy, toxic energy of 4 completely defeated people and 1 entirely liberated woman. I stood near the front doors, my posture perfectly straight, my new leather briefcase gripped loosely in my hand. Behind me, the breathing of my family was ragged and uneven. Thatcher looked physically ill. The proud, arrogant real estate broker who loved to hold court at Sunday dinners was gone. In his place stood an old, tired man whose shoulders were slumped so heavily he looked as if he was carrying boulders on his back. Every line on his face had deepened. He had aged 10 grueling years in the span of an hour. Calliope stood slightly behind him, staring blankly at the elevator floor indicator as the numbers ticked down. She was silent. The woman who thrived on suburban gossip, who loved to loudly project the image of the perfect mother and wife, had nothing left to say. The threat of federal prison and the reality of becoming a renter in her own home had finally shocked her into absolute silence. And then there was Rowena. The golden child was sobbing quietly, aggressively wiping her nose with the back of her hand, ruining her expensive makeup. Nash stood beside her, but he was not comforting her. He stood rigidly, a physical distance between them, his eyes darting nervously as if he expected a debt collector to be waiting for him in the marble lobby. He eventually reached out and grabbed her by the elbow, harshly whispering, "Pull yourself together, we have to figure out how to move that garbage out of the garage by Friday." Rowena yanked her arm away, glaring at him, but she stopped crying. The reality of her impending bankruptcy and her husband's massive gambling debts was settling over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The elevator chimed a soft, pleasant note and the silver doors slid open to the grand lobby. I stepped out first. I did not wait for them. I walked briskly across the polished marble floor, the sharp click-clack of my heels echoing off the high ceilings. I did not look back to see if they were following. I knew they were dragging themselves toward the glass exit doors, moving like ghosts haunting a life they used to own. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out onto the bustling city sidewalk. It was raining. Not a torrential downpour, but a steady, cool, cleansing spring rain. The kind of rain that washes the gray smog out of the air and leaves the city smelling like wet asphalt and fresh possibilities. I stood under the wide awning of the building, taking a deep, fulfilling breath. I did not feel the sudden urge to jump up and down. I did not feel a childish, gloating desire to turn around and rub their faces in their massive failure. What I felt was much deeper, much more profound, and infinitely more satisfying. I felt peace. For 29 years, I had walked on eggshells. I had twisted myself into uncomfortable shapes to fit their narrative. I had accepted the role of the boring, rigid, toxic scapegoat just so they could feel better about their own messy, fraudulent lives. I had desperately craved a seat at a table where the food was always rotten. But not anymore. I had not just leveled the playing field, I had flipped the entire board over and bought the table. I watched the reflection in the wet glass doors as Thatcher, Calliope, Rowena, and Nash finally shuffled out of the building. They stood in a pathetic huddle under the awning, trying to avoid the rain, looking utterly lost. Thatcher pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, probably trying to figure out how to scrape together the first month's rent. Nash was furiously texting someone, likely begging for an extension on his gambling debts. Rowena was staring blankly at the busy street, realizing her boutique fantasy was officially dead. None of them looked at me. They couldn't. The shame was too heavy. I opened my sleek black umbrella, stepped out from under the awning, and walked directly into the rain. I hailed a yellow taxi, slid into the dry, warm back seat, and gave the driver the address to my apartment. As the cab pulled away from the curb, I looked out the rain-streaked window. I watched my family shrink in the rearview mirror until they were nothing but blurry, insignificant shapes on a crowded sidewalk. I felt a small, genuine smile tug at the corners of my mouth. The curse had officially lifted. But the real beautiful part of this story wasn't just the revenge. It was what happened when the dust finally settled and the new reality became a permanent fixture in their lives. Because a fire burns hot and fast, but the cold reality of a monthly lease agreement lasts forever. 6 quiet, beautiful months passed. They say time heals all wounds, but in my experience, time just formally solidifies the boundaries you set. And my boundaries were made of reinforced steel and legal contracts. Life without the toxic weight of my family's expectations was incredibly light. I moved out of my small walk-up apartment and bought a beautiful, modern condo downtown. 3rd floor, corner unit, massive floor-to-ceiling windows, and absolutely no mold creeping out of the vents. I bought a real, expensive velvet couch. I hosted small, intimate dinners with friends who actually asked about my day and listened to the answers. I focused intensely on my career, earning a massive bonus that I invested directly into my retirement portfolio. And as for my new tenants in the suburbs, the arrangement worked exactly as designed. On the first day of every single month, without fail, a direct deposit of $2,500 hit my secondary bank account. Thatcher and Calliope never missed a payment. They never sent a late text making excuses. They knew the threat of a formal eviction notice was real, and they were utterly terrified of losing the neighborhood prestige they had sacrificed everything to maintain. I heard through the family grapevine, mostly from Uncle Gideon, whom I took out for steak dinners once a month, that the suburban castle had become incredibly quiet. Calliope stopped hosting her lavish country club luncheons. Thatcher took a humiliating desk job at a larger commercial firm just to guarantee a steady paycheck to cover my rent. As for the golden child, Rowena missed the 48-hour deadline to clear the garage by exactly 2 hours. When she arrived with a rented U-Haul truck, she found me standing in the driveway, sipping a latte, while a professional junk removal crew tossed the last of her cheap, ugly inventory into a massive dumpster. She screamed, she cried, she threatened to sue me. I just handed her a copy of the legal notice and walked inside my house. A month later, her boutique officially declared bankruptcy. Nash's gambling debts finally caught up with him, forcing them to sell his flashy sports car and move into a tiny, cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. I didn't feel sorry for them. Not even a little bit. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon in late November, my cell phone buzzed on my desk at work. The number was not saved in my contacts, but I instantly recognized the local area code. I did not answer it. I let it ring out and go straight to voicemail. I let the notification sit there for 3 hours before I finally put in my AirPods and hit play. Hey, Sloan. It is Dad. His voice was rough, gravelly, and sounded incredibly old. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept a full night in half a year. I know it has been a while, Thatcher stammered through the speaker. I have been thinking a lot lately. With Thanksgiving coming up, I have been thinking about everything, really. About what we said at that dinner. What your sister said. What I let happen. He paused, taking a shaky breath. I will not lie, I was incredibly angry at first. We all were. We felt blindsided by the lawyer. But I have had a lot of time to sit in this empty house and think. And I realize now that maybe we pushed you too hard. Maybe we did not see things clearly. I know things got bad between us. Another long, heavy pause. The silence of a man trying to cross a bridge he had personally burned to the ground. Anyway, Thatcher continued, his voice dropping softer. I was wondering if you would want to talk. Just you and me. Grab a coffee downtown, maybe. Not to rehash the legal stuff, just to, talk. Hope you're okay, kiddo. I miss you. Call me if you want. The voicemail ended. I sat back in my ergonomic office chair, staring out at the gray city skyline. There was no genuine apology in that message. There was no ownership of the forged documents, the stolen equity, or the blatant favoritism. There was just a foggy, vague regret hanging on soft language and a pathetic ask for connection. He wanted the comfort of a daughter without the accountability of being a father. He wanted to pretend we had a small falling out, not a catastrophic betrayal. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel a boiling rage in my chest. I felt utterly, completely numb. And there is a strange, beautiful kind of relief in not caring anymore. In not holding your breath waiting for someone to magically grow into the parent you needed them to be. He wanted connection, but I had finally learned that I did not need people who only reached out when their hands were empty and their fragile pride had been dented. I picked up my phone, tapped the screen, and hit delete. The message vanished into the digital void, gone forever. I grabbed my coat, walked out of my office, and headed down to a local cafe to meet Maya for lunch. It was a rare, beautiful day where everything felt vibrant and alive. I wasn't chasing a toxic version of family anymore. I had built a life that felt like mine. I stopped trying to prove myself to people who measured love in financial utility, who only saw my value when the mortgage was actively on fire. I used to think being disowned and kicked out would permanently destroy me. I thought their silence meant I was a failure. Now I know that silence is just a heavy door closing behind you, so you can finally hear your own voice again. I am not the invisible scapegoat anymore. Not because they finally saw my worth, but because I stopped shrinking myself down just to be seen by them. I don't need a seat at their toxic table. I bought the whole damn house. That's my story. Do you think I was too cruel to make my parents pay rent? Or do they absolutely deserve it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for listening, and remember to subscribe and like the video so you don't miss the next dramatic Reddit drama.